And the more you see what's really true about you, you start to realize that this emotional baggage isn't about you at all. It's an adorable misunderstanding of experience. It's, oh, I interpreted this experience in a way that's not true, and I'm believing that it's true. And I'm carrying it around, and it's adding a undetectable weight, which is now being detected. Like most progress in our lives, even if you want to call it some flavor of personal growth or development, it's in response to this flavor of radical self-honesty. Welcome to the program. My name is Tiger Singleton, and I'm going to hang out here on a live broadcast. And today, I'm going to talk about emotional baggage and the opportunity to enjoy your life, something like that. And I do this rather spontaneously. So I'm going to search my heart, see what kind of insight and wisdom I can find, and share that with you. And of course, as I do this, let's remember that I'm just talking to myself. I'm looking at my direct experience, and I'm sharing what I see. And if you find some resonance with that, fantastic. What's the title of this? Release emotional baggage and enjoy your life. That sounds good. What immediately comes to mind for me is to ask myself, what is emotional baggage? And I've certainly had my fair share. So it seems like I understand the experience. And the way that I can describe it is that there is this burden of emotional intensity that seems to squeeze the potential joy from my life. Also, we can note that in the intensity of that emotional baggage, life seems rather serious. And this is interesting because it's also like an extra weight that we carry around without realizing we're carrying it around. So much to say that it almost seems normal. And maybe we get to a point where we realize, wait, this doesn't seem normal. I'm not enjoying this experience at all. And I've mentioned this in the past. In fact, the inspiration for doing this topic is I saw someone online post a quote of mine that said something to the effect of, your emotional baggage is a backpack full of rocks that you assign special meaning to. Now, maybe in appearances that sounds kind of cryptic, but I think it's a good way to set the tone of where I want to go in this talk. Your emotional baggage is a backpack full of rocks that you assign special meaning to. Firstly, a backpack full of rocks. The visual here, and maybe you've had this experience where maybe you're out hiking and you have this big backpack on and you're climbing up a mountain and you get to the top. As you take your backpack off, you feel extraordinarily light. It's like you've been carrying around this heavy backpack and it's just become part of you, and the extra weight feels normal. And then when you take it off, you feel extraordinarily light. And this is my experience as it relates to examining any emotional baggage I might be carrying, seeing through it with regard to recognizing that it's not really mine, it's not really me. And then once you discover a permission to lay it down, there is a massive burden of weight that is released from your experience. And that's the invitation that I want to extend to whatever degree we can in this exploration, maybe remove some of the rocks in the backpack you're carrying, or just to take the whole backpack off. Now, in this quote that I mentioned, a backpack full of rocks that you assign special meaning to. Let me see if I can break this down. I have to cover a fundamental discovery that I seem to always need to address that covers a lot of ground and makes all these other things make sense. And that is the discovery that I'm not experiencing reality out there. I'm experiencing how I perceive reality. I'm not experiencing the events that have happened. I'm experiencing my interpretation of those events. Furthermore, in my experience, my emotions are not responding to reality. They're responding to my interpretation. And most notably, the more painful the emotional response, the more I'm taking something personally. And as I investigate that determination to take things personally, what I see every single time is that there's a misunderstanding that assumes this is personal, and it's not really personal. And to really see that is like removing rocks from a backpack. In the spirit of that, the invitation is to first allow yourself to acknowledge the emotional baggage you might be carrying around. And maybe we can call this an intensity of resentment, an intensity of, let's say, disgust over past experience. It's like the baggage is constantly reminding you of an emotional disturbance in yesterday. And as adorable human beings, we can be so creative in our efforts to avoid this, to hide from it, to numb it, to cover it up, to somehow avoid the reality that it's there. And this is also important to understand that if there is emotional baggage, I invite you to see that it's an opportunity rather than a problem. That it's not something that is in the way of your journey towards more love, compassion, and freedom. It is actually a doorway that will lead more to love, compassion, and freedom. And of course, this is often the misunderstanding is we see these things and we're disturbed by them. And so we want to push them away. We want to get rid of them, which is understandable. But they are presenting themselves very intentionally, meaning that this baggage is there as a teacher that is trying to point the way towards what you really crave. And so if we are going to walk through this door, I invite you to see that this door is a doorway of understanding. That the more you understand what it is, what's actually happening, it is that understanding that allows you to let go of it. And naturally, if you're trying to hide from it, if you're trying to avoid it, if you're trying to numb it, this is effectively saying, I don't want to look at it, which means you have zero chance of understanding it. And this is the place we come to in our lives where at some point, sooner or later, we realize, wow, I need to address this. Because if we don't address this and other things, we'll just call it the emotional baggage, then we continue to carry that backpack around, and it affects every aspect of our lives. And it's cute too, because we try not to have it affect our lives by hiding from it or distracting ourselves or numbing it, but it doesn't really work. It always knocks and says, look at me, look at me. And that's very intentional. Do you notice this? Like, it's always knocking on the door of your awareness that says, look at me. And the more we refuse to look at it, the more we will never understand it. And this understanding is a beautiful invitation that says it's okay to look at it. And this is what I love about spirituality, is it invites the opportunity to see that the foundation of life is holding space for you to see these things more clearly. The space of life says this is okay, which is also like saying there's no judgment here, which is also like saying this can't go wrong, which is also like saying everything that is showing intentionally to point you toward what you really crave to experience. And so this space that is held is an emptiness that loves you completely and effectively says, let's look at this together. Let's see what's really going on here. I love how one understanding just leads to another understanding. Like, to understand that these things aren't wrong leads to you understanding those things more clearly, which is what allows them to evaporate. And so in our playful exploration here, let's see if we can just hold space for any emotional baggage that might be there and not create the assumption that says you shouldn't have emotional baggage. Because it's fair to say that in some way or another, everyone is carrying a backpack full of rocks that they assign special meaning to. What is this phrase, rocks that we assign special meaning to? The experiences you encounter in your life. Let's see if we can recognize that beyond your interpretation of those experiences, there's no inherent meaning to them. It is simply life being life. This is another way of saying it just is. Like when lightning strikes a tree, it just is, right? This is just life being life. You might not understand why it happens. You might not understand the necessity of it happening. And you can tell all sorts of stories. You can say the lightning is rude. You can say the lightning is being mean. You can say the lightning is violent. But yet, the lightning isn't moving on its own accord, right? Like, the lightning isn't what does the lightning. It's life that does the lightning. Furthermore, the tree that gets struck by lightning, it's life that is striking life. There isn't really a separation between the two. We just tell stories of separation. And this is important to see because life as it is as a whole is just doing whatever it needs to do in order to maintain a balance that allows life to be life. As such, in this miracle of existence, there is something that we call lightning that has to happen in order for the balance to be maintained among the whole. And if you look out into the cosmos and you see all the stars, all of that has to be what it is in order for this to be what it is. And you see there's, in appearances, 10,000 things, right? There's the tree, there's the lightning, there's the stars, there's the yada, yada, yada. But it's all just one thing. It just is. And then we as human beings, in our capacity to tell stories and believe our stories, we give names to all these different things and separate them and say there's this and then there's this and they operate independently, yada, yada. But it's all just the same thing. It just is. And what I'm inviting you to recognize is that all of these experiences that you go through, there's a very clear distinction, which I understand might be difficult to discern depending on your depth of awareness of what's happening. But there's a very clear distinction between what is and what I turn it into. In these things that you go through in your life, they just are what they are, which is like a rock is a rock. But then you look at those experiences, you look at those rocks, and you assign particular meanings to them that point back to your worth and value. And this is the taking it personally thing. And this is a challenge that I extend to you. And we have to be compassionately gentle as we explore this. Because depending on your depth of hypnosis with regard to believing your stories, this can be difficult to see, it can be difficult to look at. Because so often we get hypnotized by our narrative that assigns meaning, and we adamantly believe that the meaning we give is a meaning that exists outside of our projection of meaning. And what I mean by this is that when lightning strikes the tree and you say to the lightning, you're rude, you really believe that the lightning is being rude, right? You really believe that the lightning is doing lightning, that it's lightning that's doing it and not life. And you can become so polarized in that view where there's no seeing beyond it. It's like, nope, this is what I believe and this is how it is, yada, yada, yada. But it's just a narrative. And so the invitation that I extend to you in the examination of your emotional baggage is to just pick one thing and see if you can recognize that the pain in that baggage is that you have assigned meaning to the experience that somehow equates to your individual worth and value. This is like saying, what happened back then means I am not enough in some flavor. And the way that we can examine this is through the example where we say, because my mother never hugged me, it means she didn't love me, which means I'm not lovable. Do you see how you can take that interpretation and carry it with you your whole life, and it becomes a burden or a weight in your backpack that interferes with your capacity to be present and joyful? Do you see the hypnosis there? Now, if you look at it more objectively, which in a way is to get your ego out of the way, which is to get your self-narrative out of the way, and we're just using silly words to point to these things, but maybe you can see that the reason, quote unquote, your mother might not have hugged you extends back millennia, right? And it extends far beyond your capability of seeing. Meaning you don't know what her journey is. You don't know what she's been through. You don't know the path she is traveling as a individual sovereign human being on her own journey of discovery. And very clearly, the way that it's playing out in her life doesn't really have anything to do with who or what you are as a human being. It's kind of like when lightning strikes a tree, the tree can think, I must be bad because the lightning chose me. Do you see how that's taken it personally? And rather than it just being what is, we craft a narrative that says, oh, this is about my worth and value. And it's just not. I guess we can explore why this happens. In fact, this is really important because it speaks to one of those fundamental misunderstandings we have as human beings that really makes a mess of our human experience. And even though I talk about this all the time, it's such a great reminder that within the human being is a fundamental drive to find yourself. It's to answer the question, who am I? And it's beautifully fascinating because this is a driving force behind your whole human journey. It's like if you're trying to figure out something in the world, you're actually trying to figure out something about yourself. In every question you ask that says, why this and why that, it's really because you're trying to answer this question, who am I? The confusion is that we are trying to answer this question in the mind, which means we are looking out into the world and we are trying to find the reality of ourselves without realizing that what we're looking at in the world is really to look at the content in the mind. And my goodness, I understand how confusing that might sound, but put it this way. To return to this example of lightning striking the tree, you see how you can see that through a particular lens that turns it into something that it's not, right? Like the example of thinking the lightning is operating independently, thinking that the tree isn't enough and it's a bad tree, which is why it got struck by lightning. You paint this whole picture of a world and what it means and what it is, but that picture you see isn't really what's there. So what you're seeing when you look out into the world is the mind's imagination. You're seeing something that's not real, which creates quite the dilemma when you're looking for the reality of yourself, but you're looking at something that's not real. This speaks to the phrase or the quote of, the world is a projection of mind. The world you think is out there isn't really out there. Which of course invites a stillness, which recognizes that the whole dilemma is happening on the inside. It's a misunderstanding, it's a confusion, which invites a stillness to see what's actually happening, which also invites a letting go of the world because you see that what you see isn't really out there. This is the confusion with the emotional baggage. And again, from a practical human standpoint, and depending on our degree to see these things more clearly, we sometimes have to navigate in the dream and find some sort of dream solution, which can help, but it doesn't ultimately liberate because we're still operating in the dream. And again, from a practical human standpoint, that's fine. It just doesn't go all the way, which isn't required. But if you look at the emotional baggage that's being carried around, Can you see in the most gentle way, without being offended or without being threatened by what I'm saying, can you see that the emotional baggage is imaginary? Like, as it's bothering you, what's bothering you is not the reality of what was, but it is the interpretation being carried around. And most notably, the interpretation about what it means with regard to your worth and value. In effect, you are using that interpretation as a means of finding yourself. This also speaks to why we so often cling to this emotional baggage, why we refuse to let it go, because it's part of our perceived identity. Right now, imagine this. Like, you go through experiences and you interpret them in a way that gives you a sense of identity. Like, I know me because this happened. Do you see how that tells you who you are? Is that really who you are, though? No. That just feeds the character that you are identifying with, believed to be you, and that character is your sense of grounding as you navigate this dream. And to the degree that we believe in that character will be the degree that we hold on to the baggage. From the ego's perspective, it feels relatively true to say that the ego would rather suffer over its emotional baggage than let go of it and no longer have an identity wrapped around it. And you can see this clearly in the determination to protect the emotional baggage, which is also to protect the stories. It's almost like a determination to be right. Like, I went through this experience and this person did this and it means this. They're a terrible person. Yada, yada, yada. This all tells me who I am. There's a tremendous clinging to the story that gives you a sense of grounding in who you are. It's just not what you really are. And it's interesting too, because in our determination to answer this question, who am I? It almost points to a fundamental fear that we have to not know who we are. Which is why we will cling so tightly to these stories. Which is why we will be so quick to take things personally, because it's a way of reinforcing who we are. But again, remember, this is all being reinforced in the imagination. And the truth of what you really are, again, what you really are, cannot be found in the imagination. Cannot be found in the stories you tell about yourself. Cannot be found in the narratives that take things personally, because again, that's all in the imagination. To find out what you really are requires the use of a completely different sense instrument, which again is the invitation of spirituality in some way, to get out of the mind and see what exists before the imagination, see what's actually real and true. And again, this is terrifying for the ego structure. And the more you see what's really true about you, you start to realize that this emotional baggage isn't about you at all. It's an adorable misunderstanding of experience. It's, oh, I interpreted this experience in a way that's not true, and I'm believing that it's true. And I'm carrying it around in this backpack, and it's adding a undetectable weight which is now being detected. And like most progress in our lives, even if you want to call it some flavor of personal growth or development, it's in response to this flavor of radical self-honesty. Even if you go to therapy and you talk about these past experiences that you've had, anything that seems to help is that you are seeing these things from a new perspective in a way that realizes they don't mean what you thought they meant about you, which is what allows you to let go of them. You see that it's not true. And you have to fight that determination that wants it to be true. And therapy, if it's done well, holds a space of non-judgment that allows those things to come up so that you can see them more clearly, which is an interesting point as to why we don't allow ourselves to look at those things, because we are afraid of the judgment, which is what fuels the emotional pain, right? The judgment that we project onto it is another form of confusion, right? We think this means we're less than, which is what gives power to the misunderstanding or the interpretation, right? I interpreted this as meaning that I'm less than, judgment. And so I don't want to look at it because it reminds me that I'm less than. And so when you come into a space of non-judgment, it invites a safe space for these things to be looked at. Like, it's okay that you're having this experience. It's okay that you believe what you believe. Now let's look at what you believe. Is it really true? And isn't this wild how even these, let's say, worldly modalities that seem to offer assistance, they are deeply rooted in a spiritual truth. You can take a little spirituality into the dream, and it will help ease the intensity of the dream. And naturally, there's no requirement that says you have to go all the way. It's not practical to assume that everyone should see totally beyond the dream. You see it to the degree that you can see it. And once you see it, you'll integrate that a little bit, then you can see a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And this exists on a relative scale where somebody starts here, they see this much, and then they move here. Another person sees this, and then they go here. Right? We're at different starting points, but all of those starting points exist in a profound equality. Like, it's just all the same. Life is exploring the totality of everything from different starting points. And again, you can view all of those different starting points and project judgment where it says, oh, I'm here, so it means this about me. No, it doesn't mean that. Or you can look at somebody else's starting point and say it means that about them. No, it doesn't mean that. You see, it's all just equal, which is also saying it just is. It's no different than looking at rocks and you see one rock that's different color than another rock, and your mind says, oh, because it's this color, it means that. No. Or this rock is smaller than this rock, and so this rock isn't as important. No. It just is. And it needs to be what it is for the fundamental balance to be maintained. Right? It's important for different rocks to be different colors and different sizes. It just has to be that way. And it doesn't mean whatever you think it means. It just is. Which is an interesting point to explore. because it speaks to the confusion as we go through our journey. Life just is, but we're constantly saying it's not. We're constantly saying it is how I imagine it to be. No, it just is. And then we believe our imagination, which is a way of believing the dream, which is a way of disconnecting yourself from reality. You see this, you get taken on a ride in your imagination about something, right? As you go through your human experience, you encounter circumstance, and then you get taken on a ride via your imagination about it, saying it's this and it's that. No, it just is. And this points to, I guess, what we can call the middle way. And then there's another saying, I forget which tradition it comes from. The phrase is neti neti, which means not that, not that. Like, no matter what your mind says it is, it's not that, not that. And it kind of speaks to an inquiry into what is real and true, where you become still and question what is real. And then anything the mind says, it's not that, it's not that. And you just let it pass and let it pass and let it pass. Which is what makes space to make contact with reality. Which is like letting the mind exhaust itself and reminding yourself that the mind just can't see it. And so you give yourself permission to, I guess, connect with that different sense instrument that can see reality, let's say, from your heart as opposed to your mind, which again is nonsense, but it's a pointer. You see, there's a beautiful stillness that emerges here. And it's very possible that one is terrified by that stillness. It's very much like being terrified by the unknown. Like in the deep spiritual inquiry, you start to realize just how much you don't know, and you were just pretending to know so much. And that pretending to know is what gave you your sense of foundation. And then in the inquiry, you start to realize it's all nonsense, which seems to destroy your foundation. And that can be scary. But then there's a settling in to the truth of the unknown. And you see that it's always been unknown. And you're fine. It has always been unknown. It is unknown now. And it will forever be unknown. Which is like saying the mind can't know. Which is also a great invitation to not believe the mind. Which speaks to the challenge that we have as human beings. Is we're constantly looking for truth in the mind, which is we're constantly looking to believe the mind, which gives us a false sense of knowing, which will inevitably be exposed and will be thrust back into the unknown. And the more scared you are of it, you'll just look to build more stories, which will then collapse again. And so I wonder if there's permission within yourself to look at this emotional baggage. And even if it's just for right now, allow it all to disappear. Which is like a full confession that says it doesn't mean what I think it means. Which is also like recognizing I am blaming life. I am blaming others for the stories that I am telling. The stories that hurt my own feelings. Now, The world has a very hard time with that. The world really wants its stories of blame, which is like saying the world really wants its separation, which is also like saying in the world of egos that see themselves as separate from everything else, those egos need separation in order to survive. So the world will adamantly believe in your stories of blame. The world needs you to blame. And when I say the world, I'm speaking to the societal misunderstanding that who we think we are is who we really are. And this is where you kind of have to be a bit cautious in who you share your emotional baggage with. And I'm sure you've experienced this, right? Because you will find people who simply validate your stories of emotional baggage. That will energize your feeling of being right in your resentment. Which is like saying, yes, you should have this emotional baggage. Yes, you should not enjoy your life. Yes, you should not forgive. You should not be free. Because this really means what you think it means. Which is wild to me, because that's just not the truth of what is. But you see how it reinforces the sense of separation. Even if your ego is in pain, even if your ego feels victimized, even if your ego feels violently right, it would rather have that for its sense of identity than being free. Which reminds me of the phrase we're all familiar with. Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And you can very much see that in the emotional baggage, there's an energy that wants to be right. And again, as I said before, I'm sharing this through the examination of my own direct experience. It's so important to see that I'm not here telling other people how to live their lives. I'm just sharing what I see within what I am as I go through this human journey, which is very much like yours, which is to go through experiences, get my feelings hurt, to take things personally, to suffer, and then to question, wait, what's really going on here? And I see that everything I think happened didn't really happen. And then I have a choice. Do I want to honor this truth? Or do I want to keep fighting for my illusion that somehow tries to protect my imaginary sense of self-importance? Or do I want that character to just disappear and realize I don't need to take this seriously? This isn't really about me. Which is such a great extension of freedom, which allows people to have their experience, allows people to have their journey. Like in the example of, say, your parents didn't love you the way that you wanted to be loved, and you realize, oh, that's not really about me. And then you release them to have their experience. Like, oh, the love that I was craving really doesn't come from the outside. Nobody else can give that to me. Which, of course, if you think love comes from the outside, if you think it's on others to give it to you, then it will really look like a lack of love. Do you see that? The more you think it should be that way, and the more you see it's not, then the more there will be a disconnect, which will mean it'll be more painful. But the more you see it's not supposed to be that way, because it can't be that way, it doesn't work that way, then it's not a big deal. And again, there's such a vast landscape to explore here. It seems like it doesn't matter how many of these talks that I do. And even though I've been saying the same thing for 15 years now, it's just an unending exploration. Because every time you take a moment to look at these things, there's the potential of seeing something brand new, even though I'm saying the same thing you heard yesterday. Which really speaks to what I consider to be a spiritual devotion. where this discovery is the most important thing. To devote yourself to seeing these, because I promise you, this will have the biggest impact on the reality of your human experience, right? To see the truth of things will have the biggest impact. The truth will set you free. Let's just sit with that. See where that takes you on the inside. See what it opens up for you. See how honest you can be about your direct experience, even though it might scare you. Even though it might expose this vast unknown about who or what you really are. That's okay. Which is funny because in the quest of finding identity, figuring out who you are, in the journey, it's been more of a letting go than an actual finding of something. Right? Like if you ask me, who am I don't know. which is funny because it's the opposite of what I thought the answer would be. Right? I thought the answer would be, I'm going to find the perfect sentence that clearly defines who I am. But the perfect sentence is just my imagination. It's not real. What I really am cannot be defined by the mind. Anything the mind says, it's not that. In fact, there's a truth that I know about what I am, but I also know it can't be spoken. Right? I can't actually tell you about it. Because everything I say, you don't even hear me. You just hear your own interpretation. One of the great examples of this is like the concept of God. Right? Like if I say, I believe in God, then your mind thinks, Tiger believes in my idea of God. No. Do you see this? This is why communication is so playful. This is why what I do here is so lighthearted, because it's impossible. It's playful. In the attempt to articulate what is really true, there is a beautiful failure. Which is also beautiful in recognizing that no one will ever actually understand me when I talk. Whether it's in this work that I do or whether it's just in normal human relationships. Which is interesting because the more I want someone to understand me, the more frustrated I'll get. Because I think it's possible. But when I see that it's not possible, I realize that communication isn't really about somebody else understanding me. Communication is an opportunity for me to be honest. Communication is an opportunity for me to understand myself, just like this work that I do. It's an opportunity for me to understand my direct experience. I'm not really talking to you. It's a form of play. Go play with that. And let's see what happens. Thanks for hanging out with me.